Good. Well, hello, welcome everyone. Thank you all for coming. My name is Jordan. I'm Nature Programme Manager here at the Conservative Environment Network. For those of you who haven't heard of us, I'm not quite sure what we've been doing over this conference period, but we are the independent forum for Conservatives both in the UK and around the world, committed to net zero, nature restoration and resource security. Before we get started today, I'd like to begin by thanking our sponsor, Thakeham Housing, for making today possible. We are here, of course, to discuss the topic of building, planning, all things NIMBYs and YIMBYs. Can building more sustainable homes turn NIMBYs to YIMBYs? So, from protecting green spaces to the more complex issue of nutrient neutrality, house building is often said to be in conflict with our environmental ambitions. But are these two core Conservative goals really in conflict? Or could building beautiful and sustainable homes quell concerns and turn the tide on our low building numbers? Well, joining me to discuss this and many other issues besides, I'm sure, I'm pleased to say we are joined by Trudy Harrison, the Minister for Natural Environment and Land Use and the MP for Copeland since 2017, Nicholas Boyd-Smith, the founder and chair of Create Streets and the chair of the government's new Office for Place. I'm pleased to say Nicholas also sits on SEN's Advisory Council. Councillor Jane MacBean, Unitary Councillor in Buckinghamshire, who currently chairs the Health and Adult Social Care Select Committee. Jane also sits on the board of SEN. And Rob Boughton, who has worked in the property and construction industry for almost 30 years and founded Thakeham in 2003. He is also a founding member of the House Building Federation's Future Homes Task Force. And Bim Afolami, as you can see, is not here, but will be here shortly, who will be joining us, I'm told. So we will cross to him when we have him. The format today, we will begin with some opening statements from our panellists of 3 minutes each. Before moving on to questions. I'm sure this will be a very popular session, so as you watch on, do think of what you'd like to ask our panellists. I will begin by using my position as chair and turning to the panellists and grilling them on certain issues. I do ask that we try and keep questions short, and panellists as well, the answers short too, so we can try and fit as many of you in as possible. But to kick off with opening statements, I'd like to start with you, Trudy.
Oh, thank you very much, and thanks for joining us. It's great to have a sellout for this particular event. I'd like to start by explaining, before I came into Parliament, which was during the by-election in February 2017, I had been very involved with my own community, and it was predominantly around saving a local school. But I think that school, Captain Shaw's, which was down to about 14 children in 2012, built for 140 children in 1829, was incredibly symbolic of a community that was dying. We'd lost 20 businesses over 20 years, and I had quite an investment in this school because I had 4 of the children. My 4 daughters made a large proportion of the community, and I am incredibly maternal. It's also why I do this job, because it's nurturing, it enables me to help the next generation, and I suppose I took on the challenge of leading in the community, saving the school, but we did it through building houses, because we identified the Lake District National Planning Policy had been a real damaging kind of policy for our area. It was a build nothing, pickle and aspic kind of policy. So we gave the National Park the choice. We said, you can be the key to our future, or the death knell in the coffin. And thank goodness the National Park changed their tune, and we got the first mixed-use planning development, the biggest mixed-use planning development passed unanimously, and the houses are now being built. And that's very much why I came into this role. And in DEFRA, I'm responsible for biodiversity net gain, nutrient neutrality, for the local nature recovery strategies, but ultimately it is this document, which I had redesigned into a handbag size. I thoroughly recommend the handbag size version. Tells you all what you need to know, nothing what you don't need to know. Ultimately, though, the apex target is to halt the decline of nature, which is declining around about 2% year on year, and to make sure that my children, our children and their grandchildren enjoy a country which has more biodiversity, more resilient to climate change, and we absolutely can do that whilst building houses, whilst building the essential infrastructure as well. So I'm looking forward to getting into some of the nitty-gritty. We were NIMBYs. We absolutely wanted to save our schools, save our village, and we wanted to grow our population. We wanted to avoid disaster, and I think rural people are the absolute blueprint for what was previously called the big society. We just get involved an awful lot more, perhaps, than when you live in a city. And I think we need to channel the energy into being positive energy.
Thank you, Minister. Nicholas.
Thank you. Thank you. Do I need to move one of these, or am I?
I think you're sharing. I think I'm sharing.
Thank you. Thank you. So the question is, can building more sustainable homes turn NIMBYs into YIMBYs? I'm trying to answer the question in my talk. The talk I give. So I'll do my best. Here it is. If you want to have a little sleep for the next 2 minutes, here's my answer in a sentence. It can help, but it's not a silver bullet. And anyone who tells you there is a silver bullet, you should probably not buy anything from that person. Beware of silver bullets. But it is important and it can help. I just want to unpick what we mean by a sustainable home, because actually there's a lot of smoke and mirrors and a lot of self-interest on that. I think it's best to think about new homes and new places and existing places in terms of their sustainability, their environmental impact, at the level of people, how people interact with the home, at the level of the property itself, and at the level of the place that it is inserted into one way or another. Different designs of property have a material impact on how we behave in them, and we all behave differently. So there was a study done about 30 years ago with exactly the same row of terraced houses with remarkably different environmental performances each one, partly just through the sheer randomness of how people behave, jumpers, windows open, heating blaring, but other things as well. Well-lit homes which have got external shutters, homes which can easily insulate and get an airstream from one side to the other. All of these have a very material impact on how efficient it is to run those. It's not even about insulation, that is important. So that's important. Secondly, just perhaps going up a level to the level of the property. Forgive me, I use a little bit of jargon, but I will explain it, or try to, and probably those who already know. Form factor means the shape of the building, how big it is, how it abuts other buildings, and how high up it goes. The form factor of different types of property is dramatically different. So, but very simplistically, a detached home is far less energy efficient than a semi-detached and a terraced home, for obvious reasons of differing portions of external walls. And once you go up above about 6 stories, the energy efficiency per metre squared of the building dramatically decreases. For all sorts of reasons, but above all, you're just getting more wind effect. And also people behave differently. You tend not to have windows you can open anymore, so it tends to be climatically controlled at all times, and that obviously drives up energy use. Also, people don't use the stairs as much. So behaviour, form factor, and then materials longevity and resilience. So demolition and construction is about 24% last time I looked, and that may have changed, of our carbon impact. What that means is we should be really good at recycling, repurposing, wherever possible, existing buildings, and we should build our buildings to last not for 20 or 50 or 60 or ridiculous numbers you see in how long this building's going to last, but for literally hundreds of years. And I would say for a public building, for 500 years. My building is 200 years old and it's going fine, thank you very much. I think it can nothing stop it lasting many hundred years hence. If you knock down a semi-detached house, and a Victorian semi-detached house, and replace it with the most energy-efficient building that we can think of right now, you've burned 100 years of embodied carbon, and it'll take about a century to catch up. So very often, the right thing to do is to make the existing building, even if it was imperfect after you've restored it, keep going. You're looking like 10 more seconds. Transport also matters immensely. So how you move about in your daily life, this is more of a challenge, I think fair to say. It's not an attack on in any way. How you move back, this again, is about 20-30% of our energy efficiency. So the types of places we create need to be easy to get to. And then biodiversity, again, which we've already touched on. The case for urban greenery in the urban realm, or indeed villages, is overwhelming. If we can create places where it is more natural and more humane to walk, to jump on a bus, jump on a cycle, to go around your daily life, what I call gentle density, i.e. terraced homes that are form factor, some detached houses, some semi-detached, some blocks of mansion blocks, in a conventional pattern of walkable, humane, tree-lined streets, in a gentle density framework, i.e. more dense than the average house that the developer at the moment would create, then two great things happen. A, you create lifestyle, you support lifestyles which tread far more like people on the planet, but B, your necessary land take, this is my key and final point, completely collapses, because you can go from 20, 15, 25 homes per hectare to 70 or 80, which are very, very livable levels, one of the most valuable, prosperous and popular places, and the amount of land you need to build to create new homes collapses without a trade-off in quality, and I would argue with an increase in quality. And that's my slightly longer minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicholas. Jane, your 3 minutes, please.
I'm going to have a minute because Nicholas will reserve. Don't worry. I'm very used to you. So I've been a councillor for almost a decade, and for all of that time I've sat on the local planning committee. So I'm very interested in what happens at the coalface of where we actually deliver development and where we deliver protections to the natural environment. So I find myself at odds with myself at times, because obviously I sit on the board of SEN, I also sit on our Children's Conservation AONB board, and I've been working for 10 years with our Natural Environmental Partnership, which was one of the new government schemes to create these new organisations looking at biodiversity, and we created one of the first draft biodiversity action plans for Buckinghamshire and Milton Keynes, which we're very proud of. So it is difficult. I'm about to, if some of you have heard this before, forgive me, because I'm going from committee to committee on planning today, but I have two 22-year-old daughters who've just left uni and are lying on my sofa unemployed, and I'd like them to get out of my house. So in order to do that, well, first they need to get a job, we're on that, but also we need to give them somewhere to live, and we need to build thousands more houses. But I live in the infamous Chesham in Buckinghamshire. We are a very old town. We date back to pre-Saxon. We have rows and rows of terraced housing, which is highly inefficient. We have social housing estates, which are even worse and not well insulated, very badly built, in my humble opinion. Apologies, housing associations. But also, we are completely surrounded by Greenbelt and AONB. And we lost a national by-election on HS2 and proposed planning reform to Greenbelt and environmental protections. Some may say it's NIMBYism. It is, but I think there is a genuine desire. We as a town are very old, very community-based. We have Amersham literally up the hill, or Chesham South, as I like to tease them. They are a very different town. They're a metropolis that has grown because of the tube line. They don't have that old live workspace. They don't have light industrial. We do not want to see them to just both merge and become part of a London suburb, which is effectively what we're in danger of becoming. We've got villages that shouldn't merge into one another. They have unique history and heritage, and we need to preserve that. And part of that is preserving the green web that exists between them. We also do it for health reasons. I chair our Health and Adult Social Care Select Committee. My entire life is spent, how do we improve health outcomes? How do we help people to live longer, better lives? And nature and the outdoor environment has a massive part to play in that. I know we need to deliver more homes, but we are going to reach a tipping point. So my girls are very concerned. They buy their clothes from kilo sales. They don't eat meat at least 3 days a week. They are questioning whether as young women they ever have children, because they are worried about what kind of world they are going to bring their children into, let alone their grandchildren. I hope that's a long way off. But this is really important. And politically, we are constantly asked, how do we connect with young people? Well, I passionately believe it's about the environment, it's about the planet. The next global war is going to be over clean water and grain and how we feed people, and we're seeing millions of people migrating due to conflict. So all these things come into play, immigration. So it is not easy, and I've sat on numerous panels where there are hundreds of questions being asked, and there are not very many answers. The one thing I am proud of is in Chesham, we have been working with Create Streets. We are developing a neighbourhood plan. We're a pilot project for the Department for Levelling Up Housing Communities. We have created neighbourhood development orders. We are looking at demolishing some of our buildings. And you would think the whole town would be screaming in horror. We're going to adopt 4 or 5 stories for the first time in our history. big town centre car parks we're going to develop, build in multi-storey car parks, and we have a town that are on board. And the key to this is talking to them right from the start. My community are incredibly well informed, not through me or Create Streets, but by the media and the pace at which people are talking about this, incredibly well informed about what infrastructure we need. We've got chalk streams and Chesham sewage treatment works that every time it rains we have literally shit pumped into our protected chalk stream. We've got to tackle these issues. We've got to have a large amount of development to raise the money to deal with the infrastructure, but we need to do it in a way that doesn't totally alter the ancient character of our town. And we hope we have a formula, but it is problematic. It's cost us £250,000. It should probably cost less, but it's the first time we're doing it, and we're working on that for a model to scale up the rest of the country. But also, these neighbourhood development orders are essentially outline planning permission. So I have an under-resourced, overworked, very stressed planning team within the planning authority. I need a dedicated team to take these 4 or 5 NDOs through a proper, full planning consultation process and give an outline planning permission, but I don't have the staff and resources to do it. We need that to happen while we're going through our public consultation, our Reg 18, and taking it to referendum, because we need those NDOs to go to referendum side by side with our neighbourhood plan. So these are some of the things we're tackling. Really pleased to be working with Nicholas and his team. They've been amazing. Sign them up quickly before anyone else does. And we really hope that we're going to answer some of the problems and some of the queries we have to create this pilot project that we can then start to roll out across parishes across the country. And the key will be, as we were just talking about, that one size will not fit all. What works for us in Chesham will not work here in the centre of Manchester and will not work in a fishing village in the Outer Hebrides. But everybody needs a solution and we need a plan. So I'll be quiet now and hand over.
Thank you, Jane. And Rob, finally, your opening remarks, please.
Listen, I come in from the developer's angle, and I think looking at our industry, we've not excelled ourselves in terms of what we delivered and the way we delivered it. But I think there is a different option. We set out a series of commitments as a business back in 2020, and there we set out that every home we deliver would be net zero in lifetime use from the 1st of January 25. We would deliver and move forwards on zero carbon placemaking. We would deliver at least a minimum of 10% biodiversity net gain, and we would try and create a more sustainable, different way of doing things from our angle. And I think we need to do this as an industry if we're going to become acceptable to a lot of people out there in terms of delivering housing. I think most people accept there's a need, particularly across the south, but that actually is very contentious. We don't deliver infrastructure. We don't deliver what people really want in those places, those villages. But actually, if we don't grow those villages, then they do risk a lot of the time of dying, as discussed earlier. Our angle was slightly different. Our angle was to engage with people and understand what they want and to try and give them what they want. But to do that with a different way of doing things. So we start with a piece of land, we map the natural asset, we look at the landscape that's there, and we look at how we can improve that and design housing around that. We have a strategic partnership with the Wildfowl and Wetland Trust, so rather than just delivering traditional sustainable drainage, water spaces that fill up when needed and then disperse, we now create permanent water spaces that actually have a wildlife value and deliver biodiversity net gain as part of that. We are working with committees that involve the regional flooding and coastal committees and DEFRA and a variety of other bodies, looking at how, when we're delivering new homes, we can address existing flooding issues, those existing problems in communities where we see failing networks, and can we oversize the suds drainage, can we do things differently to take those problems away from existing communities in those situations. We think the answer is to engage. We think the answer is to do things differently. We think the answer is to create sustainable communities where people interact well. We deliver infrastructure, so we have a community partnership with the Plunkett Foundation. When we deliver a new community, we look to deliver shops that are owned and run by the community. Pubs, WeWork facilities, etc. as well, that do the same. Because actually they're sustained, they become part of that community. And of course what we're then doing is decreasing carbon-based transport movements as well. And actually, transport is twice the size of the carbon footprint in the country to residential housing. So we need and have a responsibility to address both. And I think we can do so. So from our angle, it can be different. The best we've delivered at biodiversity net gain across our schemes in the last 3 years is just under 42%. Most of our schemes going through planning now are just shy of 20%. So well above the target the government sets. And I think, we can do these things. It does involve doing things slightly differently. It does involve thinking ahead on what we're doing and being cohesive on it. But the opportunity exists, and we can turn the dial, and I think we need to, certainly as a bit industry.
Thank you, Rob. Now, I'll turn to some questions. Do you think of your own, but I'm going to fully abuse my position in the chair to begin. Minister, what impact do you think new requirements to account for nature in the planning system, like biodiversity net gain we've heard about, will have on house building? Are they too burdensome, or will they increase perhaps the acceptability of new housing to local residents?
I think it's part of the tool kit, biodiversity net gain, and I would start, if you like, by the Environment Act. That's the big one. That's the legal thing that we in Parliament have all signed up to, and it will ensure that we leave this country in a better state environmentally. So we've got the Environment Act. Under that, we've got the Environmental Improvement Plan. With all of its 10 goals, it's 262 pages if you get the full edition. And then under that, we've got legal and moral targets to plant more trees, get tree canopy cover up to 16.5% from about 13-14%. That's 400 million trees to be planted by 2050. It's about protecting 140,000 hectares of land for nature, but it's also about restoring and creating 500,000 hectares of land for nature. It's about protecting 30% of our land and sea by 2030. So we've got these legal and some of them are moral, I would say, targets, all of them set out in the Environmental Improvement Plan. Then you get down to how we're going to do this. Biodiversity net gain is one of the key ways we're going to do that. But I think even more important are local nature recovery strategies. There are 48 upper tier authorities across England, because that's my remit with devolution. So those 48 upper tier authorities will be tasked with developing a local nature recovery strategy under the umbrella of Natural England, a small team of specialists working with farmers. Because remember, in our country, 70% of our land is farmed. And if we are going to achieve this, we need our farmers on board. So local nature recovery strategy people will be working with farmers, local authorities, developers, businesses, charities, but most importantly the people, the local people, the can-do people who know their area best to help us get there. And then there are other things like Blue and Green in 15, a commitment that everybody, wherever they live in England, will be able to access a blue or green space. And I want to absolutely pay tribute to the Wildfowl and Wetland Trust, Sarah Fowler, and all the work that she does as one of the standout organisations, I think, who are going to help us get there. And then we've got problems to solve, like the amount of nitrogen and phosphates that are getting into the watercourses by either agricultural runoff or from sewage systems, human sewage systems as well. So I actually think we have a bloomin' brilliant framework, an environmental legislative framework, right through to what we're going to do, how we're going to do it, and now we're putting the flesh on the bones with things like biodiversity net gain and the plans for nutrient neutrality and local nature recovery strategies. Probably haven't answered the question, but I think it's really important to set out the framework. And I think we've done a really good job of identifying the problem and the solutions.
There's so much in there. I'm sure we'll get into many of those issues when we turn to the audience. But I wonder, Nicholas, next, we know that opposition to new developments is often stronger in rural areas. Can we afford to just focus exclusively on increasing the density of urban areas, as you discussed in your opening remarks?
No, I mean, clearly we do need to build the countryside. I think there are challenges of transport and movement which are much harder to fix in the countryside than if you're extending an existing town or intensifying existing town or city or neighbourhood. I think a good way to think about this is that settlements need hearts. And I've done focus groups or talked to people up and down the country about development and their attitudes to it, as well as doing the polling. And it's refracted in different ways. You can get similar response in towns, but what I've often heard in the countryside is this sense that housing is imposed upon us from someone over there by a target I didn't know about in a local plan I haven't read, by a developer who's based in London or based in Dubai or based wherever. So this sense of the other doing things to us, though it's put differently. A left-wing person would say that different to a right-wing person versus someone who's not political. You've got different flavours on that theme, but it's sort of the same thing keeps coming up. And so we've got to relearn how to grow places organically. And if you look at how our villages and towns grew, they sort of grew by replication. So you've got a village centre or a small town centre, and then 100 years ago, 150 years ago, 200 years ago, even 70 years ago, you sort of have a new centre with probably some slightly denser housing, shops around it, and then concentrically out. And what we've done over the last couple of generations is essentially sprawled our way out of villages with what's often identical housing that, literally, because you have the same pattern book, could be, I won't name the developer, not represented, I think, in this room. They literally use the same house typology from Cumbria to Cornwall. I've literally seen the houses at different ends of the country identically so. And people don't like that. So it's both what it looks like and its form. What we're working with, thank you for mentioning. So we're working with a council in Worcestershire, where we're allowing local people to represent what they want new housing to, not just to look like, that matters, but also how the streets will be composed, whether there's a village green, the ease with which you can at least, even if you can't afford a shop straight away, at least where you've got something that could become a shop over time as intensity grows. So that instead of just sort of sprawling out of the village, you take those few fields and you create a new sub-part, if you like, a secondary centre, and allow the houses and the lives and the new lives to cluster around that. So it's harder to do, but that is the way to do it. And there are now some examples, there's some in Oxfordshire, there's some in Dorset, where that is starting to happen. I'm happy to give examples later.
No, Jane, you wanted to come in on this issue, and I wonder as well if I could perhaps press you just on Nicholas's last point there, and any examples of kind of popular new developments that you can think of, perhaps, and what makes those different to others?
Well, on the rural side, excuse me. So, my county ward is a third large town and 2/3 rural. So we do have provision within the NPPF to create new rural dwellings. It's really important that we support our farmers and rural providers. I think we need simplification of the rules in some ways to actually help them. If we have a collective of farms, the key for farming at the moment is diversification. So if we have a collective of farms who want to open a farm shop, it should not take 3 or 4 years to battle, and thousands of pounds to battle a planning authority to make it happen. On the flip side, I can't tell you how many new barns are needed in my greenbelt, which is complete hogwash because they're all going to be detached houses with swimming pools before you can blink because suddenly they couldn't make an argument for the farm shop or they couldn't buy the livestock. So it's tough, it's really tough to determine who's telling pork pies and who's being truthful. I have developed a gut instinct for it, but we do need to help our agricultural producers to make sure that we support what their ambitions are, help them put yurts on their land so that they can get a degree of green tourism, bring jobs, support those farms and make sure that they're sustainable. In terms of good and bad development, I sit on a planning committee, I never comment on what is good and bad development. Well, I have been known actually to rant at planning committees, but its beauty is in the eye of the beholder. I think we need a good mix. We have to embrace new ways of building. I was on a panel yesterday, we had a big debate about we are absolutely obsessed with bricks and mortar in this country, and we've got to get away from that. It takes us months to build a house, we leave it sitting in the rain, in the mud, and as Tristan said from Thakeham on a panel yesterday, we then have to rub down all the steel before we can do anything with it, and then it falls down 30, 40 years later with some developers, present company excluded. Big fat fan of what Thakeham are doing, modular building, new innovative techniques, you get houses up in a couple of days. That's what's going to drive large-scale delivery, but then it's got to be appropriate. Carbon neutral building, fantastic. And if we actually promote that, it might actually start to make consumers and house buyers think about what they're putting into their homes. We recycle a vast amount. I'm very proud of that. Why don't we not use it in the first place, not put it into plastic, so that we don't have to do that? Do we really need 23 TVs in our house all consuming energy? So good design is not just about the built form. As Nicholas said, sense of place and public realm is really important. You know, terrace housing is very nice in an urban setting, and it can look very picturesque, and it's historic nod to architecture, but actually you do need some safe space for kids to learn to ride their bikes. There's some scary statistic that 90% of children that go to secondary school have never crossed a road because they are ferried by buses or cars to and from school. We've got to get away from that. So we need green open spaces for health. We need to teach kids to ride their bikes. And also we've got a project in Chesham called Community. So we have planted over 200 trees back into our highways verges, a special type of tree with a root ball that goes straight down, limited growth, so there's limited care. It slows down traffic, it cuts emissions. The streets look nice. The residents are actually planting them and watering them for us and begging me. I've got a list for about another 600 trees and I just can't get them in the ground fast enough. That's how we deliver on the aims that Trudy's talking about, by involving the community, getting them excited, enabling them, giving them a bit of support, and just blooming well getting on with it, quite frankly.
No, thank you, Jane. And finally, Rob, we've had Michael Gove's speech on the main stage already. I wonder, thinking ahead to the next election, what manifesto commitments the Conservatives should be making to unlock more homes, prove the sustainability of the built environment?
Well, I think clearly, you know, housing is a really important issue. I think we've seen with the other political parties and where they're going on in the decisions they're having to make as well. And the Conservatives have the same decisions to make, don't they? You know, how do you wrestle, particularly in Jane's part of the world, how do you wrestle housing development and clearly what is a need? And I think we can all see that need by the rise in house prices, basic demand and supply, clearly. You know, how do we wrestle that with particularly things like the environment? You know, and I think Nicholas is right. You know, we have to create places that people really want to be, that they find attractive. You know, and the sign behind you there is a place that we delivered, and that's, you know, that started from literally some fields. You know, we planted a village green out, we designed around a village green. We had our first practical completion there in February 2020, and yet the school opened in September 21. You know, that's quite unusual on a development for that to happen. But you've got to embed infrastructure early days. We've got to find a way as a nation to ensure that infrastructure is delivered with housing and delivered really early so that people use it. And I think it's hugely important, you know, and it has to be available locally. You've got to be able to walk to school. You've got to be able to walk to the village shop. You've got to be able to walk to a village green. You've got to be able to access that wildlife. We were part of the Healthy New Towns programme back in 2018, and the value of stepping out your front door and seeing trees, seeing a green space, seeing a blue space is huge, absolutely huge on people's mental health and the effects. And we have that in our control, but we have to find a way to ensure it's absolutely delivered all the time. And it's not delivered at the back end of a development or those commitments are welched out of or whatever else. And you know, there is a different way of doing it, you know, and we have to do that. We think we've unlocked that, we think we've found that needs to become the norm, you know, and it mustn't just be reliant on a Section 106 agreement that potentially never sees light of day, or that money never sees a delivery in a community. I think it's very dangerous. So yeah, I think that's what we've got to do. We've got to find a way to do that, and that's important.
I wonder if I can turn back to you, Trudy. An issue in the news recently caused a great controversy. I'd be surprised if it doesn't come up in the questions from the audience, is nutrient neutrality. I wonder, do you think the government's proposed changes were the right approach? When can we expect to see reform back in this area?
Yeah, I mean, I think for anybody that isn't au fait with nutrient neutrality, it's a terrible name because it's not really nutritious, what we're talking about. It's pollution. And predominantly, roughly, half from kind of farm runoff from animal slurry and fertiliser, and the other half from water processes from human sewage. And for me, the solution is actually finding an optimal use for that fairly powerful substance we call shit. Anaerobic digestion is one such solution where we take waste and we process it, we produce methane, we've got to find an alternative to the 12 million tonnes of kerosene we burn through in this country for our aviation industry alone. Never mind the Argas that are powered by kerosene in rural areas and the alternatives that we need to develop for off-gas areas, possibly through hydrogen and other biofuels and synthetic fuels. So I think for me the solution is actually finding, through technology and through innovation, something we can do to power the country. Because interesting statistic for you, we've done really well with renewables, but at 40% of electricity is now, broadly speaking, powered by renewables in this country. But only 20% of our energy is electricity. 75% of our energy necessitates fossil fuels, because that 80% of other energy is transport and heat. And coming from my previous role, which was Future of Transport Minister, I know that in order to decarbonise the transport network, we're doing really well with electrification of cars. But for grunty vehicles, your planes, your trains, your JCB trucks and other makes are available, tractors, we're going to need an alternative to diesel. And I think the solution for that is getting our shit sorted.
With JCB already started with hydrogen, aren't they?
They are indeed using combustion, yeah, which has its downsides, because wherever you've got an internal combustion engine, you're going to produce PM 2.5, which is pretty harmful to health. But it's definitely a start in the right direction, and absolutely making the most of methane needs to be part of the solution. So in terms of answering the question on whether the government took the right decision, we had to do something. We've been harping on with this since 2018. We've got thousands upon thousands of homes that have been unable to be built because of that restriction, but we should do it in a way that is not harmful to nature, and that is why we also massively increase the contribution, are working with organisations to build more wetlands so that we can use nature-based solutions as well. And it's what is already written in our environmental improvement plan. We couldn't continue with the status quo because we weren't providing speed and certainty to developers, and it wasn't cleaning up our rivers either. Now we have a plan for water. We have £56 billion commitment through various sources to improve that situation, and I think what we've been is incredibly pragmatic and very sensible.
Thank you, Minister. Robust as ever, but I think there's a lot in there to unpack. We'll turn to questions from the audience now. So there is a roving mic around the room. Shall we begin at the front and work our way back? I'm going to repeat my plea again for short questions, please, and short answers as well, so we can try and fit as many people in as possible. So just on the front here.
Hello, my name is David Cowdery. I'm from the MCS Foundation. The Future Home Standard is being consulted on imminently from Michael Gove, and it dictates how new homes are going to be built. Thakeham Homes have built some fantastic homes on Oxford Ridge in Godalming, and they have solar panels, heat pumps, and they are the sustainable homes for the future. They won't need retrofitting. Do the panel agree we should be building homes for sustainable communities with all the renewables built in from the get-go?
Heck yes.
And I'll take these in groups of three.
But joking apart, I mean, in terms of the planning committee, we have.
I think we'll come to you. We'll come to you. I promise. We'll take the questions in groups of three first. Do we want to come to this lady on the end?
Hi, Sarah McMonagle from Cycling UK. What are some of the things that we can do, perhaps through the planning process or through other means, to make sure that all new housing developments are built in a way that maximises opportunities for walking and cycling?
Good stuff. And one last question. Should we move back to the second row here?
Chris Quirk, Isle of Wight. We have a problem on the island. There's two sorts of developers. Island developers and mainland developers. Island developers put in a planning application and build what they plan, and they do it to very good high standards. Mainland developers get planning permission for a big site, put a fence around it, put some toilets on it, a little hut, and then leave it for 10 years. but they started because they dug a hole. And we need to actually change the law about what counts as starting a development. You should actually have to lay 10% of the foundations or something to actually count as starting, because at present it's being abused just to keep money in people's balance sheets.
Good questions. So I think, Minister, if we can begin, I'll direct the first and the last question to you. So we had a question around the Future Home Standard, building in more energy efficiency savings. And for those of you who haven't been to our stall today, please do. We have a campaign exactly on this. And the final question around sort of land banking and the sort of when finally getting development started.
Yeah, certainly. So, I mean, yes is the simple answer to should we plan sustainable homes. The devil's always in the detail, of course, and in order to ensure that we've got the grid connection, I think we need to have 7 times more investment in our national grid over the next 6 to 7 years. So that's a huge commitment that needs to happen. But that's the job of Andrew Bowie, the Minister for Nuclear and Networks, in some ways. But yes, of course we should. And that is something that Michael Gove and his team are working incredibly effectively on. I think on the Isle of Wight, the big solution here, sorry to be a stuck record, but local nature recovery strategies. And I know because Bob Seeley provided me with a fantastic tour of your island not so long ago and explained this problem in good detail to me. The opportunity, though, is that the Isle of Wight will be one local nature recovery strategy area, one of the 48, and that will really enable a bespoke solution for planning. And I'm not sure, I'm not in the best position to talk about the planning aspect because I'm not in DLUC, so sorry to develop slopey shoulders over that one. But in terms of how we develop plans for the environment and for the economy and for social good, local nature recovery strategies will do that, and they will do it in a bespoke way that's right for that area. And in the Isle of Wight case, there will be one strategy for that island. And although you don't want me to respond to walking and cycling, I want to, because I think it's so important to develop a naturally healthy Britain. And if you'd ask me the question about what we should put in our manifesto, that would be top of my list. We're the 3rd most obese country in Europe. We've got a commitment that half of all journeys will be walked or cycled in the future. And I think, as the Minister for Access in DEFRA, how we're now working with farmers to fund permissive rights and to work to create more and better access that really is truly accessible through our legal target of everybody living within a blue or green space in 15 minutes will definitely improve walking and cycling. And I couldn't be more enthusiastic about that prospect. Having taught bikeability and visited schools where bikeability had been taught, the soul-destroying question is when you say, how many of you 10 and 11-year-olds cycle to school? Nobody put their hand up. How many want to cycle to school? Everybody puts their hand up. That's the generation that wants to be. And we need to make walking and cycling possible in every primary school across this country. And it will have so many benefits for the environment, for pollution, for emissions, and for our mental and physical health as well. It's a win-win-win-win-win all the way to the bank.
I think the Minister's on side with that one.
No, thank you. Rob, briefly, I wonder your thoughts on the Future Home Standard measures perhaps you take in your own developments to increase energy efficiency developments compared to others.
So at Thakeham, we launch our first Zero Bills house next year in partnership with Octopus Energy. So what we've done is we're building houses with solar, with batteries, with air source heat pumps, and using their AI software system to manage it. They will guarantee the owner has no energy bill for, we think it's going to be at least 5, possibly at least 10 years of being in that house. So, that's possible. The technology exists now. There's no reason it can't happen. And, I do find it slightly farcical that we're building all these houses without that technology involved. I think, we have an energy crisis in this country, not so much in terms of we don't generate enough, it's the way we move around the countryside. I think there's a huge problem that we're facing into with electric vehicles and with air source heat pumps of generating enough power and moving it, the number of pylons we're going to require around the countryside to get it from generation to the end user. We can be a lot more efficient. I think we should be putting solar onto all our houses, going back to a centralised battery park at the edge of the development, and we should be using that power and topping those batteries out at night when the power supply is more plentiful. And we would need less supply around the countryside if we were managing our resources more efficiently. I just come in on the walking and cycling point. I think this is something for us that is bread and butter. That zero carbon placemaking is about making it really easy for people to use the bike. The days of the bikes being kept in the shed at the bottom of the garden, and fight past the wheelie bins and get them out, etc., etc. We've got to put them docking stations at the front of the house, docking stations at the schools. Why do you drive past the school and see the parents wandering out with a bike under each arm? Why aren't there docking stations for all the kids' bikes there? Why aren't there docking stations in the village centre? We sort of visualise, if you will, kind of like a centre parks for housing, where you move around on bikes and cycles. You make it very easy to do that and far more difficult to use a car to get around. And that's the development process that we're moving to at the moment. And I think that opportunity exists. We can do that. There's no reason that can't happen now. We've got to empower and make it easy for people to move around by cycling and pedestrian means. Absolutely. And have the infrastructure in early, because they're never going to do that if the shop's not there or the school's not there on day one. It has to exist at the start.
Yeah, thank you, Rob, and welcome to BIM. Thank you for joining us. I think in the interest of time, Nicholas, if I can turn to you just to address the question of how we increase the walkability, cyclability of our communities, and then we'll open back up to the audience again.
Well, I think it's been adequate, quite well answered. I'll be very quick then, because we want to keep moving. So, there's a good new, I would say because we wrote it, but there's a good new street design code that Surrey County Council is using, which is very much a practical answer to that very, very important question, Sarah. I'd say it's the density of the places we create, which is not a code for tower blocks. Process is not very pro tower blocks, not rather anti. So creating places that are not, everything so many files where it's just you're pushing people towards cars. Two, it's the design of the streets, and that's with heart as well as head. That doesn't mean just a huge great sort of motorways and everything with bike lane and this and that and that. I'm going to be careful of sort of pulling our developments apart through over-designed highways. Create streets, I would say that. Create streets, not roads. And put the heart into the street design. So things such as street trees, and some people in the room know we did a big report on street trees, but things such as street trees, facades that people find humane with variety and pattern and rhythm in them, are provably linked to people being more likely to walk or to cycle. So we actually need to make it fun. Not just, it obviously has to be safe, it obviously has to be perfect, but it's actually got to be fun and enjoyable. Because most of us don't want to be just going down some huge great sort of featureless sort of canyon. It's actually got to be an attractive and enjoyable thing to do. That's and everything else.
Thank you. So I'll open back up to the room. Please do raise your hands. I think we'll come over to this side. I can see a question in the middle here. If we can try and keep questions brief.
Thanks very much. Really interesting discussion. My name's Leslie Wilson from the Institute of Environmental Management and Assessment, IEMA. One of the things we hear from our members around biodiversity net gain is that it's a fantastic thing, great idea, absolutely. How did the panel think that we can continue to manage and monitor that biodiversity net gain over the 30 years that it's required for? I know it's the responsibility of local authorities, which kind of brings me around to a related question on green skills.
If we could keep to the one question for now, I'm aware of time.
Green skills, that's it. You
Very
can
live.
tell me what you like about green skills and the need for them.
And I can see another question here on the left.
I'm just going to make it a quick one. SME builders, according to the stats, build 14% or more of UK's housing. It's very good for somebody that's a big developer to say they're reaching net zero. What's being done for people like myself to help promote that, because I want to build it as well. And so do 15 other % of people.
Great question. And I think I saw another question on the aisle here. Yep.
Thank you. It's Councillor Gurchan from Slough. Thank you. And I heard from the panel about the new houses, carbon neutral, heat pumps, solar panels, and other energy saving features of the housing, new houses. So, but the whole idea is infrastructure, having an infrastructure which is promoting green transport. So that includes, I think, the cycle lanes. Cycle lanes, when we are creating the infrastructure, roads and tramways or whatever, we should include cycles in it and then promote it on local levels so that it becomes a fashionable thing for the youngsters, for people who are traveling to work from like 2 to 3 more. I'm a keen cyclist myself. I cycle to work, you know. And in Slough, we are building a cycle lane on a very busy A4 road. I think it's about 2 miles. Yeah, about 2 miles, and so that is a good thing. We got a grant from the government for £10 million. So I think that's the way forward to get the infrastructure in before the housing, so that it can be carbon neutral.
Great. I'm going to be really rude and move on to the panellists. Trudy, the first question there on biodiversity net gain. How do we monitor this over a 30-year period?
Yeah, I think it's really important to monitor it. I was just having this conversation with Rob, actually, because society is determined that nature should recover. So we've got citizen science projects, we've got our team of scientists within Natural England and other organisations, biggest membership organisation, the RSPB. We will find out if it's not working, let me assure you. But I think ultimately biodiversity net gain is about habitat, and it's a build and they will come kind of theory. And all the evidence that we have suggests that that is the one that we should put our effort into, creating the habitat. But what's even better than creating the habitat is not removing it in the first place. And that's what biodiversity net gain will incentivise if it works. And I have every confidence that it will work, slightly later than we hoped it would be. But in terms of answering the question on SMEs, one example of what we're doing is mandating biodiversity, 10% biodiversity net gain with large developers first, and giving the SMEs time and also some lessons learned to make sure that we've got it in the best, possible state for smaller developers, because we want them to absolutely flourish and we want nature to flourish too.
And turning to you, Bim, I wonder if you could address the points around SME builders, what more we can do to encourage green skills in construction.
So in terms of SME builders, Oliver Letwin did a review on this in Theresa May's government that I helped him out a bit with at that time. I think it's 2018 we did that, and we looked at this problem specifically. And the answer that we came to was that a lot of it is about the size of sites that are offered by local councils as part of the local plan process. So the short answer is we need to have a much greater diversity of the size and type of site in order to make sure that SME builders can come in and do stuff. And that's in addition to all the boring stuff around financing and all the rest of it that SME builders, like lots of other businesses, struggle with. But there's something more important, and it's cultural. Now, who in this room, bit of audience participation, never did anybody any harm, who in this room considers themselves a free marketer, like believes in the strength of the free market? Hands up. Okay. So that's a large number, which is good. It is a Conservative Party conference. The reason why I ask that is that the fundamental principle of the free market has nothing to do with sort of right-wing or left-wing. It's about showing good practice, and through good practice and good things happening, effectively creating a competition between people, and that overall improves outcomes. I think that the reason why Poundbury, and Poundbury is a very famous example, because it was obviously the Duchy of Cornwall, but others, when you see really high quality development that's developed by innovative builders doing good things in environmentally friendly ways, in the right infrastructure, and that look attractive, and all the things that make people want to build, people do not oppose housing in the same way, because they're the sort of houses that they want to live in. And the reason why I asked about the free market is, it's the same principle. We need to show good things happening. And when good things happening, and SME builders is the best way of doing that, because when you're a very big builder, frankly, you can put up a large number of very, very similar buildings in in an area and you're less incentivized to provide that sort of quality. I think that principle should mean that we should increase that 14-15%, whatever the number was. Yeah, and increase it hugely. And just the last thing about green skills, I have to be honest, I always struggle with this because there is no sector in the economy where people don't talk about skills shortage. I really don't know which one there is. What I do know is that there are sectors that are hard to decarbonise. Cement, bricks, various things that we talk about. And unless we can bring the costs of those things down so that we can use those things in a more environmentally friendly way, it will become more and more expensive to build high quality green housing. So what we need is less in terms of green skills in the way that I think people conventionally think about it, though I respect you didn't have a chance to finish your question. What we should do is think, how do we encourage more innovation to drive the cost of these building materials, environmentally friendly building materials, down so that we can benefit more people with lower prices and higher quality?
Thank you, Bim. I'll turn finally on that point to Rob. So as a house builder yourself, I wonder what your perspective is in terms of the green skills required in the economy and to be able to build in the way that you do.
I think this is a really interesting point. We've been looking and working quite heavily on embodiment of carbon in construction as well. And our mantra is how can we get that down economically where it makes economic and financial sense. We are changing, I think, the way we do things. We're changing to a timber frame-based construction now, from traditional, brick and block construction to the way it was. We've got a demand now, a far greater demand, and the skills shortage is huge across our industry. We've got far greater demand in terms of the skills we need to fit air source heat pumps, to fit solar panels, etc. But we've got to find more efficient, productive ways to produce houses as well. Fundamentally, we produce houses in this country the way we did 100 years ago, with the exception of mechanised diggers. Our productivity curve is very poor compared to other industries. We've seen some major failures trying to do that. The likes of Ilka and Energy Modular haven't made it work. I mean, we are literally the first mid or large house builder in the UK to move to BIM, three-dimensional design, far more efficiency in the process. We're looking at a very different way of developing products, and then for manufacturing more efficiently as well. We should move to our first pop-up factories on site, on our sites within the next 2 years, that will see us, eradicate a lot of the weather from the problems that we have with building, etc. We've got to move things forward.
Can I just challenge you? I'm really sorry. Just on the point around building, very briefly.
Sentence, please.
Why do you think that, if you ask most people, would you rather have the same building, same house, same size, it was built 100 years ago, or have one that was built today? Most people in this country would prefer one built 100 years ago. I don't think most, in terms of the style, in terms of how it was done.
Yeah,
I'm just wondering.
Sorry, the point I was making was relative to the process by which we build, not what we're building. So the way we build is the same purely. Other industries have become more automated. We haven't as an industry. But in terms of the look and feel of a house, listen, we're the lead deliverer at Wellborn. Wellborn is a 6,000 home consent north of Fareham. It's the next Poundbury, but it's 2.5 times the size of Poundbury. The architecture there is very different to what is the normal architecture that goes up across a lot of our countryside. We do. It's not always just about producing something that is prestige and harks back 200 years. Sometimes you can produce design today that looks very good and leads it as technology. But what it shouldn't be is bland. What it shouldn't be is cheap materials. What it shouldn't be is insensitive to the environment. You can mix all those things into it and produce something that is, leading edge design. It can be a hark back to Georgian style, but it can be done properly and it can be attractive to people. So, I think from our point of view, we need to challenge more as an industry, certainly, to answer that question. But I think coming back around, in terms of green skills, we have to move forward as an industry and as a business. It is our productivity is so poor compared to a lot of industries out there. And green, I see moving forward, green is the way to do that. Absolutely.
Thank you, Rob. And I hope that on that note, we can all agree. I'm sorry we didn't get time to fit you all in. We could keep going, but sadly, time marches on. I'd like to thank all of our panellists for today: Trudy Harrison, Bim Afolami, Nicholas Boyd-Smith, Jay MacBean and Rob Boughton. thank you all for coming. Do stick around. In half an hour, we'll have our next event in this room, Feeling the Heat, How Far Can We Adapt to the Effects of Climate Change? But until then, thank you.